Hi, this is Eric from longboxreview.com, and welcome to another Spotlight episode featuring Troy Wilson, who is a writer of children's books, magazines, stories, and comics. Troy first contacted me back in February 2021 to enter a Tales of the Legion Project podcast issues giveaway. And then later, Troy sent me a copy of the book that he wrote, Perfect Man, along with artist Dean Griffiths. And even after that, even later, he sent me his latest book, which is Hat Cat, that he did with artist Eve Coy. And so we're going to talk about those things, as well as some other comic book related materials. But we jump right into discussing Perfect Man. But I wanted to give you a synopsis of both Perfect Man and Hat Cat before we did that. So Perfect Man is about the following. Michael Maxwell McCallum, I hope I said that right, Troy, lives in a world just like ours, but peopled by superheroes. When Michael's hero, Perfect Man, quits his job without warning, Michael isn't worried. He knows that Perfect Man will come back. He always does. So that September, when a new teacher shows up in his classroom, a teacher with a number of special powers, Michael figures it out right away. Mr. Clark is Perfect Man. Mr. Clark doesn't say yes, and he doesn't say no to Michael's endless questions, but he does encourage Michael to find his own superpowers. Sounds perfect for a comic book fan, right? And then Hat Cat. Ever since the old man found a little kitten under his hat, the two have been the best of friends. There are always plenty of kitty rubs and food and talk to go around. Every day, Hat watches as the old man goes outside to sit and feed the squirrels with nuts he places on top of his hat. But Hat the cat is not allowed to join him. What if Hat ran away or chased the squirrels? Or worse. Then the old man leaves and does not come back the next day or the one after that. When people come by to take care of Hat until the old man returns, will one little girl give Hat the chance he's been hoping for? This is a sweet story about companionship, love, and trust. With that preamble out of the way, let's talk with Troy. Joining me is Troy Wilson, a Legion of Superheroes fan, but more importantly, an author of several picture books, including Perfect Man with Dean Griffiths. And I believe, Troy, this is your latest, Hat Cat with Eve Coy?
Right. Hat Cat is the latest. Came out early this year.
That's right. And you have written several other picture books. And as if I can believe your website, Troy, you have stories for kids, a bunch of stories for kids magazines, and you've written some comics as well.
Written some comics, not in a professional capacity, but I have written a few. There's been a few kind of anthology type of things that I joined in on, and one that's up there on the site or linked to on the site was one that a buddy of mine we just did partly just for fun and practice. We'd hoped it would get somewhere, and it didn't exactly, but it is up there on the web, so there's a link to that one.
Well, I just want to say thank you for being in the spotlight today, Troy. We have a bunch of things we're going to talk about here, and let's just start, if you don't mind. Let's start talking about Perfect Man, because that is the whole reason I wanted to talk to you in the first place. So just to give a little bit of background to the listeners, Troy listens to the Legion Project podcast. And during the course of that, Troy actually sent me a copy of his book with Dean Griffiths, Perfect Man. And it is about a superhero. And so I thought that was a really cool thing, a superhero connection, but done in a picture book form. It, to me, it really is, they're both forms of sequential art. And I really like that idea, that connection between the comic books that I love, and I assume you love as well, and these wonderful creations that you're involved with.
Well, the connection is really deep, actually, because several of the inspirations for the book were, in fact, comic book inspirations. And one of the key ones that would be less obvious to a lot of people, I think, is Green Lantern 76. Now it's when it was Green Lantern Green Arrow, and that is the infamous issue where the older African American gentleman confronts Hal and says, "Well, you're working with the blue skins for the orange and purple skins or whatever, but you're not helping out the black skin folk and so forth." And that set me off on a path, because I thought about that, and then I thought, well, what if? And it's weird how the mind works, but I went to, well, what if it's a kid lecturing a superhero saying, well, what you're doing, it's saying this in a kid-like way, but what you're doing isn't working, isn't helping. Why aren't you, you're just beating people up and you're not helping anything. Why aren't you getting at the problem, solving anything? Why aren't you doing anything? And I don't know if in this instance the kid actually directly says, well, why don't you go back to before there's a problem? Why don't you get to be teaching people or teaching kids before they ever become super criminals or whatever? I don't know exactly what I thought the kid would be saying, but that was in sort of kid-like language. I thought it would be something like that. And what ended up happening was I noted that idea, but then I found that, well, it seems like the kid knows too much, and it seems like the superhero knows too little in that scenario. So I ran it through my head a bit more, and it melded with my own experience a bit. And so in the end, I did stick with that idea of, well, maybe a superhero decides not to be a superhero and maybe becomes a teacher. But I did it in a way that it wasn't at the kids' urging or anything. And it was a case where the teacher tells the kid, gives the kid some advice that actually, as a kid, I could have used, because I was the type of kid who was maybe in my room and reading too much, and maybe not out there experiencing life quite enough. So my own experience kind of played into where the story ended up. So that was a big influence. And another big influence was Marvels by Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross, just from the perspective of a person on the street type of approach. So you've got this superhero who this kid adores that then quits. And then the idea is, well, what would be the effect of someone who had been observing that superhero? What would be the effect on them if that superhero quits? And this happens to be a kid. So that was an influence. And then a couple other influences that I suppose are maybe a bit more obvious and are in the dedication. One being the kid who collects Spider-Man, where you have Spider-Man's biggest fan meeting Spider-Man. And then in this case, you have, in my book, you have a kid who is the biggest fan of a superhero and may or may not actually meet that superhero, because again, the superhero quits. There's a teacher that the kid is absolutely sure is perfect man, but we never know for sure that that's the case. So there's that influence. And then there's one that a lot of comic fans might not have encountered. It's called The Kryptonite Kid, and it's a prose book by an author named Joseph Torchia. I may be totally butchering that last name because I've never heard it pronounced. And in that book, you have a kid who is writing letters to Superman as if Superman is a real person, and the kid is absolutely sure that Superman is a real person. And the kid has reasons in his life to really need that, to really hope for that, because his life's a bit of a mess in some ways. So that sort of absolutely ironclad belief in something was another thing that fed into this. So all those four things really fed into what this what this book of mine became. And I mean, I wasn't necessarily aware at the time of all of them being an influence. So some of them I realized later. Some of them I was like, oh yeah, that really had an impact. But they all played a big part.
Wow. You just blew my mind on a couple different levels there. I mean, just the layers of influences, whether you knew them or not, like you said, as you were writing this. But first of all, I love this. I love the story, obviously, because I reached out to you and I wanted to talk to you about this because of the superhero connections. More importantly, I love the fact that the teacher is, the real superhero of this story, and inspiring his student to go out and live and be more and do more and experience more and all that, and how it ends up playing or how it ends up for that main character. But the fact that you just mentioned Kryptonite Kid, you're the only other person I know who has read that novel.
Wow. And here's the thing, back at you, because I was not expecting you to go have any recognition of that at all. I thought, okay, this is some obscure thing that I encountered it was literally the high school library in grade 11 or 12. That I had this bright green cover and Kryptonite Kid. Of course, I'm going to pick that up. And I haven't actually read it since then, and I do want to revisit it. But it obviously had an impact.
Yeah, in fact, I looked at that dedication, and of course, I recognized Roger Stern and the name Joseph Torchia, and that's how I would pronounce it. It rang a bell, but I couldn't place it. And so then when you say Kryptonite Kid, I'm like, oh, of course. So yeah, that's just amazing. But yeah, like I said, that the Perfect Man is the superhero connection here. Even on the cover, for the folks who are listening, obviously can't see this, but you should go check out the book and buy it. It says special 32-page issue. I mean, which all comic fans of any longevity will know exactly what that is a reference to. So I just, there's so much layers to this book and so much joy, quite honestly, Troy, that I really enjoyed this so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And one other thing that actually, in the lead up to this conversation, blew my mind a little was I always knew, okay, there was the Kid Who Collects Spider-Man influence. I always realized that, but I looked a little closer and I was like, well, if you look at like the huge portion of the book that comprises the conversation that the boy has with the teacher, I mean, I couldn't help but think of that story long conversation that the kid has with Spider-Man. And I couldn't also help but think that it is the exact reverse. We have this kid who, the secret identity, if it's actually the secret identity at all of the superhero, is right there. Whereas, but is never confirmed one way or another, whether it is the case, whether this is Perfect Man he's talking to or not. Whereas with the Roger Stern, Ron Friend's story, it's only at the end of the story that the secret identity is revealed. And of course, the endings are exact opposite too, because you have the opening up of this kid's life afterwards in my story, whereas it's the exact opposite in The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man, where that's soon to be the end of the conclusion, a wonderful conclusion in a way of and tragic of the kid's life there. And the setting as well. The setting in my book is a school, which is sort of the launching pad for the future. And the setting is quite the opposite in The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man. It just blew my mind how inverse it was, how exactly inverse it was. That I didn't really realize that until I took a little bit of a closer look for this talk.
Well, and that's one of the things, it's one of the joys about rereading things, is the stuff that you pick up on, even in, and I definitely don't mean this in any kind of, I'm not trying to diminish the work at all, but children's books. I mean, and that's the other thing I really like about the two books of yours that I've read so far, Troy, is that there's a sophistication to your storytelling that I don't see in other children's books that I've read, and I've read my fair share of them, having raised two sets of girls over the years. So I like I said, I really have enjoyed these two books, and of course I've reread them a few times now in preparation for our conversation. So, and every time I do, I see just a little bit more. I discover something else that I didn't really realize or notice before. So I really like that about your work.
Well, I appreciate that, and that is certainly key for picture books, or helpful for picture books, because of course they are often read and reread a lot, to kids, and so it's helpful if the adult can see something new in subsequent readings, as opposed to, okay, I've seen everything I need to see with this book.
Yeah, and then it gets donated to somebody else, some other family.
Right.
Quickly, right?
Yeah.
Now, in our correspondence, you had mentioned something having to do with Stan Lee. Is that related to this particular book, or is it a different one?
It is related to Perfect Man, because I don't know exactly why I had a bee in my bonnet that, I want to get Stan Lee to read this, and hopefully he'll like it. But that's something I wanted to do. And Roger Stern, who I had gotten it to first, at the time, he had there was a Stern Talk message board back in the day, and I contacted him through that and got his address and sent it to him, and he really liked it. And I mentioned to him, well, I'd like to get this to Stan somehow too, and I wasn't going, oh, well, you're second fiddle, I really want to get this to Stan. I mean, I got it to Roger in part because, hey, I'm dedicating this book to you, among others, and you inspired me and so forth. So I wasn't downplaying at all how amazing it was that he got it and he liked it. But I was also, do you have any advice about getting it to Stan as well? That'd be cool. And he did give me some really valuable advice, because he said, well, why don't you try POW Entertainment, which was an offshoot that Stan was involved in at the time. And it was really good advice, because I'm sure, generally speaking, people probably would have at that time sent Stan stuff through care of Marvel Comics, and that there would have been probably a lot of that going through that channel, and not as much going through the POW channel, as it were. So I did snail mail a copy to Stan, and with a letter saying, you've given me such enjoyment over the years, and I just hope that this gives you some tiny amount of enjoyment as well. And I had my email at the end of the letter and so forth, and I didn't really expect that it would reach him, or if it did, I didn't expect that I would hear back or anything like that. And for a time, I didn't hear back, but then, and I don't know exactly why, then I decided one day, I don't know, I'm just going to look at my Hotmail spam folder for whatever reason. And I look, and honestly, lo and behold, there is an email from Stan Lee in my spam folder. And I'm like, oh my God, spam folder, what are you thinking, putting this in here? I could have, who knows? It could have been within days of this being purged from the account. So, but yeah, it was this enthusiastic email that eventually became a quote on the book itself. And I printed out that email and laminated and all the rest of it. And I was just like, oh, through the, it did occur to me, I have to admit, it did occur to me that, well, what if this is an assistant or something and not Stan, and they're mimicking his style, because, he can mimic Stan's style and so forth. But through future correspondence, and I mean, via this email, and I didn't abuse it at all. I mean, there was not that many back and forths that happened afterwards, but there were now and then. There was like the sort of quick kind of dashed off typo that was like an assistant wouldn't have that in here. An assistant would have cleaned this up. And like there were just down the line, there were things where it's like, no, this is a real guy that I'm dealing with here. And a really cool offshoot of that was that one of the comics for an anthology that I did, there were actually a couple of panels for primates. There was a primate rescue center that it was a fundraiser for these two anthologies, and so I did something, got a whole bunch of other people to do some stuff, and I approached Stan and said, hey, I mean, would you be able to do something for this? It can be like a couple of three panel strip, even. Like, it doesn't have to be much of anything, but it'd be amazing if you were able to do something. And there was some correspondence and a bit of, there was some time that passed related to this, that he wanted to do it, but I mean, he's a busy man. And then I remember it was a rainy, I don't know if it was October, November, whatever, rainy night. All of a sudden, out of the blue, there's a script, a Stan Lee script in my email. It is, sure enough, it's for a 3-panel gag, but a really good one. And there it was. I was like, oh my goodness. Wow. And so I approached Dean Haspel, actually, and said, hey, do you want to, because he was a big help in initially hosting these anthologies on his Activate site, him and a number of partners, Activate, that eventually became a thing on Comixology. But he was a really big booster of this whole thing initially. And so I thought, it'd be cool if he got to draw this. And he was like, I'm going to need proof that this is Stan Lee. So I just forwarded him. You couldn't make it up. I forwarded him the correspondence, the kind of ongoing correspondence that Stan and I had over months about this Panels for Primates. And he was like, okay. And he was also convinced just by the email itself, because the address was very much the kind of address that Stan would have had. It was like this abbreviated form of comic book man. It was like comicbookman@AOL.com. It was just the kind of thing it would have been anyway. And so that was his turned out to be his one and only correspondence with Stan Lee, that I was kind of honored to be in the middle of. So, and that all started via me asking Roger Stern, any ideas how I could get this book to Stan? So it's kind of cool. And I will also say that Stan, whenever I did, very infrequently, as I say, use that email to for any reason, he was super quick in responding, like really fast. For someone as busy as him. And part of his secret, I think, was just being very quick and to the point, quick and enthusiastic in his style, but quick and to the point. He would respond pretty darn fast, and just as gracious as you would have hoped he would be. In terms of somebody who was a childhood hero of yours, exactly as nice and courteous and generous as you would have wanted him to be. So it was really cool.
Yeah, that is amazing. What an amazing story.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So is that strip available anywhere that people can purchase the anthology it was in, or do you know if it's still available and somehow?
Unfortunately, it isn't anymore, because it was put out at that time via, now was it, I'm gonna get it wrong. Was it Monkey Brain? I think it was, which was an appropriate publisher. They put out, what did they put out now that I really liked? Oh, what was it? Oh, it's oh darn it. It's there's this kind of this female thief, and it's like super cute. But darn it, I can't remember what the heck it's called now. Paul Tobin, I think, wrote it, and Colleen Coover drew it.
Yes, and I'm in the same boat where I know exactly what you're talking about, but I cannot remember what it's called.
Exactly. But anyway, they put that out among other things. But I mean, that's what I loved of theirs the most. But anyway, down the line, they did send me a notice and saying, well, it's been up however many years, and now we're going to retire it, but thank you very much, and I thank them very much, and all that. So unfortunately, it is no longer. I don't think it's anywhere, unless I don't know if Activate's still around, because in Activate archives it might still be around potentially, but other than that, I don't think so. Yeah,
well, that's unfortunate. And I think we were talking about Bandette.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's it. That's the one. Loved it.
I just Googled it real quick.
Yeah.
All right. Wow. That's like I said, that's an amazing story. I want to switch gears, if you don't mind, and talk about Hat Cat for just a few minutes. Then we have some other questions to get to. So, like I said, I initially wanted to talk to you, Troy, because of Perfect Man, but then you graciously sent me a PDF copy of Hat Cat, and I have to say that story really touched me. It's partially because of coincidence. I had a scare recently with my father, a health scare, and I had read Hat Cat right after that. Right. So yeah, there was a lot of emotions going on there, but that story I think is just wonderful, and it is something that I think that a lot of parents should go out and purchase and read to their kids, because it's not just about this wonderful old man who feeds squirrels with nuts on the top of his hat, and a little kitten that he takes into his home, and their relationship and all that. So I know that this particular story has a real personal inspiration for you.
Right. It does. There are certainly a couple of book inspirations as well. But the primary inspiration was one of my late grandfathers, who did exactly what the old man in the book does. Is he would go out and he would do exactly that. He would put the nuts on his hat, and we've got photos. In fact, my Twitter avatar right now is a photo of a squirrel kind of thinking about getting right up on the hat. He's got 2 feet on Grandpa's hat, or popped hat. We call them pop. And he's looking up at the nuts that are on the top. And there are other photos where the squirrel is right on the top of the hat. So he was certainly an influence. I mean, he's been gone for nearly 2 decades now, and this was a really wonderful surprise, because you do tend to think that after a person has been gone as long as that what you have is strictly and only the memories and the stories that you have, and even those are fading a little with time, and that's what you have, and that's all you expect to have at this point. And so it was a lovely, lovely surprise to find that no, there's actually something else that, in a way, he and I can share, which is this book. And yeah, it really was a nice surprise at this late date. He would have been really amused by the cat aspect, though, because he was no fan of cats. You pick and choose with this stuff, right? As far as making up a story, no fan of cats at all. While I was alive, he and his wife did not own any cats whatsoever. And my mom says that they did have, when they lived in the country, they did have a few cats that were not so much beloved indoor pets as they were kind of mousers for the barn. They had their their kind of mercenary function, and they um, weren't really beloved by him in the way that this old man loves the cat.
Well, I found that story just, wonderful. There's a little bit of sadness to it, but ultimately it's a heartwarming story. And I just think it's a wonderful little story for kids of all ages.
Well, in I often get asked, sort of why do I write kids books? Why do I write picture books? And honestly, there's a lot of ways I can answer it, and a lot of ways I do answer it. But I think the bottom line of it is it just makes me happy, and it makes other people happy. And like you say, for all ages. So it makes not just a specific portion of the population happy. It can make everybody happy from 4 to 104. So that's a lovely thing to be able to do. And I mean, you can do it. Sometimes you can do it in a way that's, relatively light and fluffy, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's lovely. Sometimes, and other times you can do it as this book does, where it's not all smooth sailing, but you can get to a kind of a healing place, a good place by the end.
Okay, Troy, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about your kind of your comic book pedigree, if you will. Like I said it before at the top of the show, you're a Legion of Superheroes fan. How, tell us a little bit about your comic book origin story, I guess. When did you start reading comics? What were the comics you liked to read?
Sure. Well, I really wish that I could remember what my first comic was, but sadly I can't, and that's largely because it seems to me like they were always there. It seems like they were always ever present. I do know this. I know that I got into comics through comics. So I didn't get into comics through toys or a TV show or movies or a video game or anything else. It was definitely comics that got me in. And I know that comic strips were a big part of my early, really, really young, say 4 years old on type reading. And that was partly due to the fact that, okay, well, the comics in the newspaper, but also back in the day, in my day, the pocketbook collections of comic strips were everywhere. I mean, they were not only in bookstores. I mean, they were in grocery stores with the prose adult material. So there was Peanuts and BC and Wizard of Id and Dennis the Menace. All that stuff definitely plays into my early reading. And I also recall the I guess we could call it a picture book. It was a little golden book, I think, or something. But there's a monster at the end of this book with Grover in it that was in comic format. I know that I loved. I also know that the Asterix and Tintin, or Tintin, however we want to pronounce those comic book albums, those translated albums, also were everywhere. Every library, every bookstore, but also, again, the grocery stores. They're even in the grocery stores. And if they're in the grocery stores in my small town, they are everywhere in Canada, which is where I am.
I was going to say, that was not my experience growing up here in Idaho in the States. So I am a little jealous of your experience.
Oh, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And yeah, I bought every one of those albums and read every one of them several times. And of course, Marvel and DC comics, the serialized floppies or whatever you want to call them, factored heavily as well. They were there in all the no comic shop in my small town, about 20,000 people. But I went to a store called Jack's Store, which was within walking distance of my house, and I would get a lot of them there, and it was pretty reliable. Like if I never had any problems, say for instance, picking up the Avengers or Hulk or Teen Titans or whatever it was, month after month, there were no gaps in what I wanted. Later, I found that I would have to go a bit farther afield for other comics that I wanted. Couldn't necessarily reliably get, say, the Defenders there, but I could get it elsewhere. So, and I also, I was never a Marvel or a DC guy. I was always a Marvel and a DC guy. I was always equally into both of those, right from the get go. And then going beyond my small town, I was there till I was 16. No comic shop there. But after that, I always lived in a city that did have a comic shop, and consequently, my tastes and what I was exposed to expanded exponentially to every genre and company under the sun since that time. And that was, of course, pre-internet days. But now that we got the internet, so there's all the what you can access over the web and everything as well. But yeah, it began. It just began with comics in a lot of forms being all around me, despite the fact that there was no comic shop in my town.
And what was the year that you really were you either where you feel like you discovered comics or you really got into comics?
I would say probably let's say 1974 for the comic strips for sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's photographic evidence of me holding up various little albums, Peanuts and Dennis the Menace or whatever, when I would be about 4 or not that much older than 4 anyway. So that would be the start of that. And then I would say if I look at when I was really regularly buying Marvel and DC, that probably would have been closer to 78 or 79 when I was regularly buying them for myself, as opposed to they were just there and around type of thing. And I think that probably corresponds to, I'm getting an allowance now, I'm doing a few things to get the allowance or something. I think that's probably why that begins there. I mean, it could have been a little earlier than that, I suppose. But,
so it sounds like we're about the same age. And you got started about the same time I did. So yeah, like mid to late Bronze Age stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's cool. Yeah. All right. Well, Troy, this has been so much fun. Before we go here, is there anything that you have coming up that you'd like to talk about and point people to?
Well, nothing that I can talk about except in a very cryptic fashion. So my latest manuscript, conveniently, is I would say that it's actually in some ways a combination of Perfect Man and Hat Cat. And I'm really excited by it. And honestly, before this point, I never really had what you would call like a kind of a bucket list book, a book that I just, it has to be out and whatever. But I would actually say that this is one, and is one that, I mean, even if it doesn't find a publisher, I will likely self-publish it in some form, just because I really like it that much. So that is I'm hopefully not going to have to do that. Hopefully a publisher hopefully a publisher out there will see the quality and pick it up, and then everybody will be able to see it and so forth. It'll be less work for me, but we will see what happens on that.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to that. And if people wanted to check out your work, contact you, where are the best place or places they can go to?
Well, the website, they could go to troystory.ca, which it doesn't have all the books that I've ever written up there. It has all the ones that are still in print because, alas, sometimes there's a few that go out of print over time. And also, if they're on Twitter, they can follow me at Troy Story 2. At some point, I keep saying to myself, at some point, I'm going to cut back a little on Twitter and check it a little less and post a little less. But today I was posting more than ever. So it's clearly I'm not that successful at that at this moment.
You and me both.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I will certainly have links to those places in the show notes for people to follow up on. And I will say before we actually get out of here, Troy, I love what's on the front page of your website. You have persistence like typed out many, 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 many times, and then at the very end, it's luck and talent.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, there are. I personally know writers who maybe they're just not as obsessed as me about this pursuit, but writers who have more natural talent than I ever will, but it's just not maybe as important to them, so they dabble and whatever, but it's not a persistence thing for them, and so they don't have all a lot of books or any books are out or whatever. But it really does come down to persistence is the biggest thing. If you look at like if there's somebody who is like super talented but not persistent, and somebody who is moderately talented and very persistent, I'll bet on the very persistent person every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Troy, thank you so much for coming on here and being in the spotlight, as it were, on this episode. I very much enjoyed our discussion, and I look forward to talking to you some other time.
Thanks very much. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Troy Wilson. I certainly did, of course. If you'd like to send me feedback about this conversation with Troy, send email to longboxreview@gmail.com. I'm on social media at longboxreview, all one word. And as always, you can send texts or leave voicemails at 208-953-1841. And it's not over yet, folks. Just hold on for just a few more seconds and listen in on some final conversation that I have with Troy about the Legion of Superheroes. Thanks for listening.
If in terms of like favorite past comic book or whatever, like one that I was going to mention, my favorite Levitz Legion storyline is actually the whole Shrinking Violet being replaced storyline.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it because it like Levitz was so smart in playing the long game, when he had like Duplicate Boy comes in and pummels Colossal Boy, and at the end of that fight, he looks at Violet and he's just like, that's not the Violet I know. And it's just and it's like you think, okay, well, that's just because she's changed and she's in love with Colossal Boy now and whatever, but it's like it's literally not.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got these delicious moments like that pay off when you look back at them. And then just the revelation was so strong, I thought, when it was revealed, when they sprayed her with this gas that affects Durlans but wouldn't affect her if she was actually Shrinking Violet, and then that moment where it's like this heartbreaking moment where she's saying, yeah, well, you should be able to just grow because you're not a spy, right? And she's like, yeah, I can't. And she's like all tearfully, I can't. It was so good.
Yeah.
So good.
I totally agree. That was one of my favorites as well.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, it actually, I mean, I'll go even further. I would say that to me, that's one of the last moments where I thought that like Levitz, well, certainly Levitz Giffen Legion, but even Levitz Legion almost in some ways, like that was the peak of like one of the peaks of his powers and Levitz and Giffen's powers was that moment, because I don't know, there's some trailing off that happens after that to a degree, though there's still like, again, there's high points, but to me, like And I'm so glad. Here's the thing: I'm so glad that I experienced that story the best way to have experienced it, which was right from the get-go. Like, I mean, I was reading his run right from the start, and so I was reading it when they went off on Chameleon Boy's mission, and she was on it with Colossal Boy and all that, but it wasn't her, and right through the reveal. So just like reading that on a monthly basis and living with it on a monthly basis, and then coming to that surprise, it was anyway. I just wanted to mention that because that's sort of a Legion thing that obviously you would be familiar with, and it was a fond memory of mine.